This dissertation aims to explore the strategies and infrastructures available to promote the integration of migrants. Migration is the term used to define any migratory movement, whether individual or collective, motivated by reasons such as work, economic, study, or instability in one's country of origin. This movement ends in a second country where one settles temporarily or permanently. An insight into the reality of migration flows is needed for nations to act and to create appropriate integration policies. Integration is a process that depends on several factors like policies, the welfare system, and the labor market. And it's also a concept that has many shades. It can be more advanced in some areas and less in others. For integration to be effective, it is necessary to ensure that the immigrant can integrate into the economic fabric of the receiving country by finding a job that guarantees him or her a proper living. While all dimensions of integration must coexist in harmony, it is crucial that language barriers, which could represent a major obstacle to effective integration both socially and professionally, are also removed. Language acquisition, in this case of Italian, is a process that takes place in an environment with linguistic data, interlocutors, and sociocultural context. The environment can be natural, home, guided school, or mixed. Regardless of the environment, what the learner receives is an input, namely the written or oral linguistic data with which he or she comes into contact. In order for it to be useful for learning purposes, the input must be comprehensible and not too far above the learner's competence, so that it can be converted into an intake, which is a lasting acquisition. For the intake to settle down, it is essential to associate the practice called output, that is, the learner's productions both oral and written. In a context guided but disconnected from reality, it is possible that the output might be very restricted, which is why it is important for the teacher to contribute in orienting the learners towards a functional use of the language. To support the study of Italian, Europe has offered the tool of CEFR, a descriptive system with which to measure the skills achieved by those who study a European language, a study that can be functional when it's linked to the ability to communicate in certain contexts, or a study with instrumental purposes in which languages become an educational tool and with which the learner acquires social and metacognitive skills. In the case of adult migrants, the purposes are functional. In the case of children, they intersect, also helping the learner's cognitive development. There are 6 levels ranging from A1 to C2, from basic skills to maximum skills with technical language. In order to develop an effective language training course, several elements must be taken into consideration, including the position of Italian, which may be foreign language, second language, native language, or language of contact. The teacher must consider these aspects and also the type of learner he or she is speaking to, which may be non-literate or with different levels of schooling, of various countries or of the same country, oriented towards work, social integration, or study. Taking into account the learner's background, the student may be the child of an immigrant family in Italy. In the learning path, the Italian language occupies a space that can be defined with the expression contact language, in an attempt to explain the complex situation experienced by immigrant children. For them, one cannot speak of Italian as first language or second language, so the term contact language is used to define a linguistic communicative competence as a meeting between different cultural codes that produce new identities. In other words, when the language of the parents and Italian develop simultaneously. This definition is not free of conflict, as in addition to positive and growth-promoting elements, this peculiar condition also affects the individuality and identity of the learner. The context in which this learning takes place is therefore a place of confrontation and a collision of languages. Children who have another well-established first language instead are learners Italian as a second language. Therefore, in the drafting of learning programs, these subgroups cannot be considered in the same way and require dedicated and specific projects. Unlike a child, an immigrant in adulthood has consolidated his or her identity through the use of his or her mother tongue, living in daily contact with his or her native culture and sharing customs and values. In light of this reality, learning a new language as a second language will be quite different in many aspects, including the cognitive one. Malcolm Knowles explained the difference in learning in adulthood, describing its strengths and weaknesses. Among the strengths are the desire to know. In fact, the adult wants to know about the learning program and wants to feel involved. The concept of self as the individual feels the sole responsibility for his life, the experiential background that encourages learning, and orientation towards learning since what has been learned is immediately applied. Critical issues include fear of making mistakes, interference from first language, which will have more space, especially at the beginning, slower ability to learn that might discourage the learner. For language education to be complete, the teacher must achieve three objectives: culturalization, namely creating contact between cultures; socialization, because the use of the new language learned will increase opportunities for socializing; and self-promotion is the goal of every educational process and is achieved once a good level of culturalization and self-promotion has been acquired, so the individual can realize the project of self. Migration flows have thus given rise to multicultural classes that in turn create a multicultural and multilanguage society. This condition in which we live as today's society also requires the establishment of intercultural dialogue, which oscillates between a one-way process of transmission and reciprocal processes of joint activity. In the first case, communication becomes the transfer of resources between subjects, the exchange of social values according to precise rules, and the exchange of information. In the second case, communication becomes a means of creating bonds and is about sharing and social relations through the use of language. A multicultural society is also characterized by multilingualism, namely, knowledge of languages other than the native language, an ability that brings with it numerous benefits: mental flexibilities because it increases the ability to adapt to different communication situations, problem-solving skills, metalinguistic skills. It also improves learning ability and slows down age-related cognitive aging.